Good afternoon, everyone. It's Maria Sanchez-Keene from the Center for Organizational Effectiveness. Welcome back to Fundamentals and Practical Leadership for New and Emerging Leaders. Our topic today is communication basics. We start with this great quote. Developing excellent communication skills is absolutely essential to effective leadership. The leader must be able to share knowledge and ideas to transmit a sense of urgency and enthusiasm to others. If a leader can't get a message across clearly and motivate others to act on it, then having a message doesn't even matter. So with that in mind, let's begin. Just as a reminder today that we will be using interactive polls, that you are able to raise your hand, use your chat, and we do have that Q&A for you to use. If you get lost on where we're at, just always look for the Zoom icon and go through the Zoom icon to come back to the slides. So the purpose today, clarity, conciseness, and civility. How do we ensure that we communicate from that perspective of clarity, brevity, and civility? How do we support others in achieving these communication goals? How do we ensure that we effectively communicate so that we're able to move the organization forward in ways that it needs to? And what can we do as a leader to advance these important areas? A key role of a leader is to bring along its staff, to listen carefully, to be present to them, to bring feedback from staff to other leaders in order to continually create an environment where communication can happen from a perspective of clarity, conciseness, and civility. So great communicators, we're going to start today just by looking at some of the things that we know make great communicators. And after this, we're going to watch a brief video and I'm going to ask you to play on what you think the different people in the video did with respect to communication. So the first thing about great communicators is that they're authentic. And so while you need to deliver a message, typically you may receive something like key messages from your senior leaders. What's really important is that it comes across authentically. You need to find and use your own voice in language and values that are your own. At the same time, you have to be careful with how the message is being communicated so that there's a sense of unity from the leadership on where it is that you're moving. But find your way, your comfortable way of communicating. Second point is to respect people's times. So it's really important, particularly as we know, people are so busy and there's so much communication that people receive, that you want to be really clear in terms of providing rationale or examples to what you're communicating, be clear and to the point, and also be careful with jargon and those very small acronyms that we all use so that we can keep the communication really clear. In a world of virtual communication and obviously in-person virtual, it becomes even harder to pay attention to nonverbal cues because there's so much happening that's not on the screen. However, you can still pay attention to even things like, do people have their cameras on, and inviting your team members to have their cameras on while you're with them, particularly when you're engaging in dialogue. That in itself provides a level of presence that you otherwise would get if you were in a team meeting. But what are other cues that you need to be watching for? And what's really important here is that you really ensure that you're not making assumptions about it, but that you're asking questions to bring clarity in terms of what people might be trying to communicate. So for example, if someone is sitting cross-armed the whole time, I might read that as this person is really closed, they're not being receptive to what I am saying, but it might be that they're just cold. So we want to be sure that we're just checking in on those nonverbal cues. Obviously spending more time listening than talking, and we're going to spend a bit of time today about thinking about ways in which we can really be really present and empty ourselves to be able to listen carefully to what others are saying. So really listen to hear. What we tend to do is we tend to listen to someone and we're already formulating in our mind our response. So the discipline is to be able to sit with it and say, okay, I'm just going to try to be really present to what people are saying. Communicate often. And again, today we're going to talk about where is it that we really need to pay close attention to how often we're communicating key messages. So stay in touch with people and check in regularly, and recognize that people need multiple ways of communication on the same topic. So you might send an email and then follow up with a Zoom connection or a phone call, just to be sure that people are understanding what it is that's being communicated. tailor your approach to the audience, to the message, and to the situation. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how you develop a communication plan so that you're mindful of all your stakeholders, the sequencing, and how it is that you tailor messages to the people that you're talking to. Do a follow-up, and this is so critical. So sometimes we communicate something and we think, well, we already sent that information, they must have received it. But that follow-up, particularly with individuals on your teams that you know might struggle with what you're communicating, may not be available through email as often as we want them. Think about other ways of communicating that people are going to be able to receive the message that you are trying to share with them. And then think about civility. So think about the tone in which that you are setting, the tone that the organization is setting, and think about ways in which you're going to build trust. We talked about that last time, ways in which we can ensure that there is a consistency about who you are and what you say so that people can trust what it is that you are communicating. Okay, so with that in mind, we actually pulled these two videos that are communicating some pandemic news. I know that we're all exhausted from it, but it's really interesting because we are decided to present to you two very different leaders who communicate very differently. But I want us to just think about these points. In a moment, we'll show them and think about how well they did in communicating. So let's go there now. So please let me know if you can't hear it. Hopefully you can.
Way the province can somehow restrict or prevent gatherings.
You know, I've always said, Mark, we just don't have enough bylaw officers or police officers, and we've always relied on the public, and they've done an incredible job. You just can't police 14.5 million people. But as Dr. Williams said, I think it was a few days back, as he went to go see his grandchildren, practice social distancing. And that's the most important thing right now. We're moving forward in a really good way right now, and we just want to keep the numbers going down. And all the credit goes to the people of Ontario. If they didn't follow the protocols from the chief medical officer, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in right now. So let's just, as I always say, use common sense, focus on social distancing. And I know it's tough. I'll tell you, it's tough right now. Not seeing loved ones, not being able to hug them, but just practice on social distancing.
And from a health perspective, this week testing will continue, including giving ongoing public confidence that we are reaching isolated, rural, Māori and Pacific communities. Contact tracing will be bolstered even further, and we'll continue to use the best evidence, advice and modelling we have to make daily decisions to serve New Zealanders. The most important thing to remember in the meantime, though, is that all of this preparation takes us to an alert level in 1 week's time, a recovery room of sorts, that has many restrictions. Yes, Alert Level 3 allows more economic activity like construction, manufacturing and forestry, but it does not allow more social activity, and for good reason. If we want to make sure that we are a health success story and ensure our economy can start to operate again without the virus taking off, we need to get this next phase right.
Okay, so two very different leaders, but I want us to think about what they did well and what maybe they didn't do as well. So we're going to put a poll in the chat. So I'll ask you to find your chat and just put your first name, as we've done in the past, in the chat so that I can see, thank you, people coming on. So just give me a moment to go through that. And it's so interesting. Thanks. I'll just wait for you guys, for all of you to put your name in. It's so interesting because this was a year ago. And first of all, you can see how much things have changed in that 1 year in terms of communication, in terms of our strategies and our exhaustion to the messages, right? Which is a really interesting thing, even about communication, right? Like we've heard this over and over again, and now we're getting exhausted. But from that moment in time, what do you think what did Doug Ford do well? And then what did Jacinda Ardern do well? So here's the poll. Just post it there. If you can click on the link again, as always, it will take you to the poll, and we'll start with Doug Ford. So looking at the points that we have, what for you did he do well? And you can just click on it, on the areas, that's it, that you think he did well. So like Lori, I see that you're not able to get into the poll. Kathleen will assist you in the back end there to get you. Good, thank you. Yeah, I think many of the dots are going to are authentic. There was something about that particular message of Doug Ford that you really felt like, oh, you're getting it. You really, really are getting it here. So that was very good. Communicating often, yeah. I mean, we rely on the fact that we know when that message is coming out, and we can count on it coming out. Tailoring the approach, yeah. I mean, he was appealing to the people of Ontario, and he did a good job, didn't he, at that point of being able to say, you know, the credit goes to the people of Ontario, which are things that I think people needed to hear. Rings differently today, but at that point, it was something that we heard. Respecting people's time, absolutely. Okay, thank you. So let's now think of a different leader in Jacinda Ardern. So again, same question. What did she do well? Yeah, that model of civility, that really comes across in her communications. Absolutely. And she's been able to really maintain that all the way through. Her ability to be very authentic. I don't know if you've seen the one where she's communicating from Facebook in her sweatshirt. And there's something so approachable about her leadership style. Respect for people's time, absolutely. She said what she needed to, and then she allowed things to go from there. So thank you. Our point here really is that while the styles are so different, there are good communicators that come in different ways. And so the way that Doug Ford and Jacinda Ardern communicate might be different, but they both come at it from that place of their own authentic place and style. So just really reminding that there isn't just one way to do it. It depends on who you are, and it's about finding your way of doing it that makes sense. At the same time, you want to be sure that in your style, you are communicating the message that you need to be communicating in a way that people can hear. So thank you for that. I'll just close the polls, that poll down. I'll ask you to come back to Zoom, and hopefully you can see the slides there. Sorry about that. And I will now turn it over to Carrie.
Thanks so much, Maria. What we're going to do now for the next, well, almost all of the rest of our time together is actually work our way through those 8 headings in the Great Communicators checklist. So we want to start and talk about authenticity, and have a great quote here that authenticity requires vulnerability, transparency, and integrity. And those are 3 of the words that we've heard before in some of these sessions when we were doing polls with you about great leaders as well. So, you know, great communicators and great leaders often have quite a bit in common. So we'll move on to a slide that has some detailed tips about being authentic, in particular under those 3 categories. From a vulnerability perspective, it can often be challenging. Well, it can be challenging for anyone to really put themselves in a vulnerable place in a conversation, in an interaction. When you're a leader, again, it can be even more vulnerable because sometimes leaders feel that it challenges people's sense of their confidence or people's sense of their competence. And, you know, done well and done in a very authentic way, it certainly does not. Often too, when leaders are being vulnerable, like when Maria was sharing her why with us a few weeks ago, a leader may be doing it in front of a much bigger audience than somebody else would. So if you think about some of those exercises that we did do, you've created your why, channel your why into when you're talking with people. We did also did an exercise for those of you who are doing the certificate, did an exercise on thinking about the legacy you want to leave. So always be mindful of those so that you can use your own voice and sort of be very, put yourself out there a bit from a vulnerability perspective. That being said, again, you also don't want to be, even though you might be feeling panicky inside, you don't necessarily want to portray panic to people that you're working with or whatever that really strong emotion is. So you can put that out there, that be a bit vulnerable. You know, I'm not sure. I too don't know exactly what happens from here, but here's what I'm thinking, and here's what we're going to do together. And that idea of maintaining deliberate, calm, and bounded optimism. So, you know, that deliberate calm of, again, don't let your sort of emotions get too much the better of you, that you're sounding panicky or whatever the case may be, depending on the discussion. And that bounded optimism. So, you know, you don't want to say, oh yeah, COVID's going to be over in the next 3 months, but you want to say things like we heard the leaders say, like we need to take the next step. We need to do it together. We are going to come out of this together. We're going to, you know, it will all be okay somehow. It may not look like what it looked like before. So really important tips around vulnerability there. Transparency, very similar to, you know, be real about the certainties or uncertainties. We don't know exactly what's going to happen 2 months from now, or we do know that tomorrow this is going to happen. Just be very real and honest, and, you know, that we will communicate when we know what's going to happen, you know, at any particular time. Again, don't set yourself up for having promised something that you're not necessarily going to deliver on, or saying you don't know something and they find out later that in fact you did. So just be very transparent about those things. And integrity, state expectations, and then follow up on those expectations and those accountabilities, both for yourself and for others. So, you know, I will get back to you next week. You make sure you get back to the individual next week or the group next week, and state your expectations and accountabilities for other people. I need you to do this by a certain date, and get back to them, which doesn't mean that the date can't be negotiated if it needs to be after the fact. What you don't want, though, is to be checking back and sort of saying, okay, this was due today, and the individual never came back to you and said, oh, I'm going to have a problem with this deadline for this reason. So you want to be checking in so people know that you're going to hold them accountable, and you want to hold yourself accountable. And those three things together will really make sure that you come across in a very authentic way. We're going to move on to talking a bit about respecting people's time, which is also a very important thing that great communicators do. So again, a couple of tips related to that. Do your very best not to underestimate how much time something will take. So if you need 15 minutes, if you think you need 15 minutes of someone's time, make sure that, you know, you're going to stick to that. If the conversation does take longer, you're going to check in. You know, this is taking a bit longer than I thought. Should we reconvene at another time? Are you okay to spend a bit more time? And also, you know, checking in, is now okay? So both pieces of that. And again, know how long you have. You have an hour-long meeting with a group of people. Stick to the time allotted. If you do get into, you know, an area of discussion that goes longer than you expected it to do, either try to defer things on the agenda as soon as you know, this one conversation that's really important and it's taking us some time. Could we move agenda item 5 and 6 onto our next meeting so that we can continue to talk about this particular item? So just be very aware and ahead of it, as opposed to sort of getting it, 2 minutes before the meeting's about to end and then realizing, oh, what are we going to do? Because we spent so much time, because we still have so many items left. So really keep on top of it early in the meeting. As many of us are aware of, sort of that idea of stopping an offside conversation, asking it to be taken outside of the meeting or discussed after the meeting, whether it's you with someone else or 2 other people or a few other people. If it truly is offside to the topic at hand, then find a way to move that into a different venue so you can accomplish what you told people you were going to accomplish in a particular meeting. Always consider what things need their own email and where you can group items into one. Sometimes people think, well, if I just send one email, I'm saving time. They'll just open it once, it'll all be in there. But often things might then get lost in the email. They might have, it's so long that people get 3/4 of the way through, then the phone rings and whatever the case may be. Sometimes multiple emails is faster because people can prioritize when they see the subject headings. And another thing to be really aware of about respecting people's time is in many of the industries that we work in, we do spend so much time thinking about advocating, making sure we're advocating for our clients, our patients, the public that we work with, the communities that we work with. And that's a really important part of what we do, and particularly what we do as leaders. On the other hand, there is sort of that fine line between appropriately advocating and, sort of getting a hot button pushed and jumping up on a soapbox that really takes a meeting or a conversation off from where it should have been. And again, not really respecting people's time from the perspective of we were trying to accomplish this today, and now we're way, way, way over here. Now, if the thing you want to talk about is, really we need to change what we're trying to accomplish a little bit, then yes, that might make sense. So it's very, very contextual, but just something to think about, that you're not sort of always running with your hot button, that you're taking that moment and is this the right time to have this conversation. To go to the email piece, we're going to actually, this idea of, do you send one email? Do you send multiple emails? How do you send an email that's very respectful of people's time, that's easy to read, that can get you where you need people to go as far as what they've heard from your communication? So we have a sample email here. And we're actually going to go into another poll. I'll read the email out, and as we go into the poll, want you to think about sort of what either works or sort of what really could be improved is the most important thing to think about. What about this email really could be improved? So Maria, if you can bring us to the poll, I think, while I read out the policy, and people can start again getting to the poll. You can either go back to the poll window if you still have it open, or you can go into the chat and it will be the poll will be posted again. So the email reads, oh, I guess, I'm sorry, I thought the email was in the poll. Let me read it out to you again. The email reads, I have resolved the issue that you brought up at the last team meeting regarding inconsistency of referral form completion. Everyone on the team should let me know if you get an uncompleted referral form. There's a new policy regarding slip and fall safety. They have decided this is necessary and everyone needs to read and sign it. Also, please mark your calendars for an organization-wide meeting that has been scheduled for November 13th. Please read the slip and fall policy and follow it effective immediately. It's attached here, and you need to sign a confirmation that you reviewed it and put it in my mail slot. So, and thank you for Maria for adjusting back and forth there for me. If we can go back to the poll now, what do you think could be improved about that particular email that we just saw and I read out? I see Colette is having trouble getting into the poll again. I think Kathleen will connect with you on that. A few people are in now. So again, either click the link in the chat box, or if you still have the window open, go back. So we got quite a few people sort of saying up front, too many topics or tasks in the same email, which again, you're absolutely right there. It's disjointed and there's poor flow. It doesn't have sort of a thanks for your assistance or any sort of warm greeting or warm sort of closure at the end of the email, which I think is a great catch for sure. Too much information, too direct. And I think maybe what the person who says too direct is meaning is that it sort of, again, doesn't have any warmth at all to it as you're connecting with the team for the communication. Multiple topics that jump around. The title could be different. That's more reflective of what it is that people are going to see, for sure. A more consistent message, too many different unrelated topics. So that's clearly a high priority for folks, the topics. It's just, there's too many, they're not organized well. Yeah, I think picking up lots of the things that I expected you would pick up from that email, and appreciate that. But sometimes when we have things in our head that we want to get out there, we just sort of do that. We're busy. We know we've got to communicate X number of things. We just open up an email and let it fly. And then it's like something you can check off the list. But it doesn't, again, think about those really important things related to being a good communicator, knowing that people will read the message, take the message on board, understand what you're trying to say. So in fact, although it may feel like saving time to fire off one quick email with everything in it, you may be wasting time from the perspective that you're not getting the impact that you want to get with that particular communication. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, I just see there somebody said, it indicated that they decided, not we, and that's a really good catch as well. The way that that decision was sort of framed. Thank you so much. Yeah, you've really picked up on things. So I have the next slide that we have. So if you want to find your Zoom and make sure you're in your Zoom again. So here's an alternative, which again may not be perfect. So a number of you said you need to split this up into a couple of emails, and I don't disagree. I think that's absolutely a great strategy for this one, is to split it up in a few different emails. The alternative we've provided is a way that you could do it in one email and, you know, have the impact a little bit better. So we've caught here, if you can see the greeting, good morning all, and you can see at the bottom the thanks and have a great day. So as people said, you know, make sure you're being a bit warmer in how you get into the email in the first place. The subject, I think, is a bit better there as far as it gives a bit more information about what's actually in it, and that there's an action required by the people, which I think is important to share. As was mentioned in the poll, it previously said they decided. So here we have, good morning all. There have been a number of slip and fall incidents in the past couple of months. So it gives you a reason why it was decided, it was necessary. And then it says, in review of the contributing factors, the Health and Safety Committee recommended a new policy. So instead of they recommended, exactly who it was, and also gives a bit of information about why it's important. Again, there is an action. You can see there was an action in the original one, but it was sort of hidden in with everything else. You had to sign it and return it. Here we have, you know, the action is in bold so that it jumps out, and it gives a date as to when you want it back, so that you have sort of that follow-up date. As we talked about in authenticity, you're stating your expectations clearly. Here's when I need it by, and then you have a follow-up point. You know, if you have any questions or concerns is added here. So it's not just you have to read it and sign it, but read it. And if you have, you know, if you have anything you need to talk about before you sign it, please let me know. And then the follow-up items are, again, still in the same email, and I absolutely agree you could have split them out, but they're sort of separated into a second section. And again, I think gives a little bit more warmth, a little bit more direction as to what's happening. So thank you for the discussion on the referral form completion. I've had a discussion with the team lead of the referral group, and we'll be attending their meeting tomorrow. So it doesn't just say, yeah, okay, I'm dealing with it, but here's what I'm doing. If you get an incomplete form, please let me know so I can follow up, which is, you know, it was in the original. And sort of that finally, mark your calendars for the organization-wide meeting. That's at the end, because obviously it's a ways away if we're asking for confirmation by July 15th. So there'll be more communications for sure about the organization-wide meeting. If they don't get that far and they miss it, they'll get it on the next one. So it's organizing it in sort of what's important, that warmth that you talked about, using bolding and underscoring and all of those things to make sure that it gets broken up a little bit. And again, I think you picked up on all of the things that could have been challenges in the original one that we could look at correcting. So I'm going to move on quickly to our next item, which is nonverbal cues. As Maria said, you know, it can really be a challenge to us in this Zoom environment. Nonverbal cues may not be as easily picked up on, and you may not be able to address them as easily as well as you might if you were face-to-face with somebody and you could have a chat afterwards, that kind of thing. If you're in a one-to-one meeting or if you're in a larger group meeting. I also find with online meetings, if you break it up into sort of breakout rooms, if you were all together in the same room, you could see each other and how the breakout rooms are sort of communicating with each other, and you can't do that when you're in breakout rooms here. Beyond that, what I really want to talk about on this slide is don't assume that you know what their body language means. So Maria pointed out, you know, somebody with crossed arms really could just be cold. And when, you know, back 20 years ago, when you took a course on nonverbal cues, they did essentially give you a list of, here's the cues to watch for and here's what they mean. So again, if somebody's got their arms crossed, that means they're not open to hearing something. Somebody's leaning back in their chair, that means they're trying to leave the conversation. Like it was a very, very, you know, you just check the box. Are they doing this? Are they doing that? And then it was assumed you knew what was going on with them. And today we understand so much more about making sure that we have cultural competence as well as cultural humility around, it's not just that crossing your arms may mean you're cold instead of that you're not open to having a conversation, but in different cultures, different nonverbal cues will mean different things. So again, not making assumptions. Notice body language. So this is really sort of our 3 tips here. Pay attention to your body language and what you think that you're putting out there. Pay attention to their body language. But if you notice something, then take the opportunity to check in. Don't just assume what's happening with them. Take a moment to check in. If there's a couple of people in the room sort of leaning back in their chair, you can have that, okay, are we all okay? Are we all on the same page? Are we okay to keep having this conversation without sort of, you know, these 2 people are doing this, so that must mean. So it's a noticing, it's a means to check in. If you're in a one-on-one, it can be even easier to say, okay, let's pause for a moment. I do notice X. I just want to make sure I understand what that means. Is there something else you want to talk about? Are we still on the same page? Are we moving forward together? So just don't make any assumptions like we learn in our cultural humility training when we do it. And I'm going to pass it over back over to Maria. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carrie. I'm noticing some really important practical things that are coming up on the Q&A. Wendy, with respect to that question that you have about sometimes people having a hard time getting to the point and taking up time, and sometimes the frustration that we feel related to that. It's interesting that we are on the slide of listen to understand. I'm going to answer Wendy's question and then move on to this. There's a few things that I'm thinking about related to that we have all run into. So one is trying to coach the person to say, you know what, I have 10 minutes. What is it that I might be able to help you with? But that will sometimes feel, if this is a common concern, it might feel like the person who's saying I have 10 minutes, it might feel very abrupt for them. The second option is to speak directly with the individual or coach the person to speak directly with the individual to say, for me, it's hard when you come into my office and ask me for support, because lots of time I'm not sure what you're getting at. This is what would be helpful for me. If we could start with just saying, I need about 10 minutes of your time. This is what I'm hoping that we might be able to discuss. That will help me to be present to what it is that you need. The third option might be for you to do some universal training on communication such as this with your team. These are available for you, are part of it, so that people start learning about developing their communication skills. It may be that this individual is coming in nervous or anxious or having a hard time putting their thoughts together, and somehow giving them some tools to be able to do so ahead of them coming into the room might help. So some suggestions for you, Wendy. I hope that's helpful. Which really leads us to this idea of listening to understand. Why is that person coming in perhaps with that? And understanding that sometimes what we need to do is be really present to the individual. And part of communication is ensuring that the person feels heard. And so particularly there's, different types of communication. There's transactional communications. There's of course crisis communication. And then there's communications about certain things that matter a lot that require time. And so listen to understand is particularly important here. Very important in moments of change or transition in an organization, in order for you to bring your staff with you, to be really present to what it is that they are experiencing at that time. So for you to be able to say, I'm going to create space at the beginning of our meetings to really check in and see where we're at, and for me to listen to where my staff is at and therefore be able to support them. So emptying yourself to be present to that, it's really hard to do, particularly when you're stressed or when things have certain timelines, but to try to discipline yourself to say, okay, I'm going to try to check in with people, giving them a way to do that so that I can be present to them, asking questions to confirm that you understand what they're saying, and asking questions to confirm that they understand what you are saying. We're going to get into conflict resolution later at our next one, I think. And you'll note that this is something that's very important, particularly again in moments of stress or where there's the beginning of conflict, or you're feeling like not everybody's rowing in the same direction. For you to pause, listen, and be able to hear, and for them to know, for you to know that they're also hearing you. So rephrase and repeat so that you have an understanding if you're not getting it correctly. And then having a place to make sure that you're responding to what they're saying so that they know that you're being heard as well. So really important, particularly when it comes to transformational moments in your organization that require a bit of time. For really good communicators, it's a whole lot about listening. So then the question is, going to that, how often do we communicate? I mean, there's work that we do, and I think to myself, we've communicated this out all the time, and people are like, oh, that's the first time I've heard that. Oh, well, I didn't know that that was happening. And it's always amazing to me because I think, but we've communicated out quite a bit. I don't get it. But we need to understand that there is so much information coming at people that we all need a variety of ways to hear and to absorb information. And that often, until it becomes personal, I'm not paying attention as much. So you may have said that to me for 2 or 3 months, but it isn't until it's coming directly at me that I'm actually going to sit up and pay attention. So part of what we need to do is ask ourselves, how are we going to ensure that you are able to filter through all of the things that you need to communicate and really hone in on moments that need full attention? What are those moments and how do we do it? So here's some kind of important things. How do we get there? So amazingly, I think most of us know, people need to be exposed to a message 7 times to take it in. That's incredible. Like, we may have said it, you may be thinking, but I emailed that to you. How do you not know? But we talked about it at the meeting, but I shared that PDF. How do you not know? But we just need to be patient and understand people need to communicate it at least 7 times. In terms of audio messages, which we do a lot, you need 6 to 20 times before it comes in. So that's just important for us to keep in mind. The other important thing is to understand, what is your single overriding communication objective? So getting it down to, this will mean we are going to be better together. This will mean that you will no longer have to do X. And the more that you can personalize it to answer that question, what's in it for me? How does this affect me? The better off people will be able to receive that information. So refine the message as you go. Lots of times you might be thinking, that was so clear, I don't understand why people weren't getting it. But understand that people just need a variety of ways to communicate. And the other thing is to determine, how do you determine when you are going to be communicating 7 times? Because obviously that is not everything. But there are certain things that you as a leader need to be communicating often and regularly, that you need to be keeping in the back of your mind. So those types of things include relational. So sometimes it's the one that we miss. Relational means you belong, you're important, your work matters. Those types of things people need to hear often and regularly in a variety of ways. And it's one that we don't tend to think about being one that we communicate regularly. But if there's something that you might want to leave with, it's that sense of, I need to make sure that my team knows they're important, that they belong to the organization, to this team, and that their work matters. And how am I going to do that? How are we going to celebrate each other's work? How are we going to make sure that people understand that they are part of the team and that their work really is important? Second thing is strategy. So really understanding, what is the strategic plan for my organization? How am I communicating that? How am I embedding that into the work that we do? And how is my team rowing in the direction that my organization needs to go to? The third is significant change. This is such an important one. And I know we've done quite well, I think, in doing this through the pandemic, as we've talked to teams, is ongoing communication. Many people have said that through the pandemic, they've had better communication than at other times because it's constant, it's regular. People feel like they know what's happening. Sometimes a lot too much, I understand. But really thinking about, if this is happening in my organization, does this require a significant change? And sometimes even if it's a big change in the organization, your team isn't going to be impacted as much. Just communicating that is going to be important, and communicating it regularly. People have a sense that you may have said that now, but it might change in the future. So for you to be able to say, at this time, everything remains the same for you, or up until now, and then until this time period, it will remain the same, and then you'll see changes. These are important things. And then, of course, issues of safety and risk. You need to communicate over and over again. So again, if you're thinking, what is it that I do that I need to be really focused on ongoing, those are the top 4 things that we would say you would need to be really focused in on as a good leader. So let's check in. So if we do, I'm mindful of my time here, thinking about the pandemic, I know this is getting old. This question: what have we learned from the pandemic about communication and this idea of refining and repeating? What have you learned? Communicating 7 times. Oh my gosh, that is so good. Clear is kind, isn't it? Yeah. Clear is kind. Yes, connection is critical. It's back to what we were talking about, that influential leadership, right? That idea that the more I connect, the better off we'll be. So many good ideas coming up. Different needs depending on the individual. Oh, love that. Individualized thank yous go a long way. Understanding that people listen and learn differently. Yes. Connecting to understand. Wow, what's said matters. Lots of communication when things are always changing. Timing is critical. Trying to keep things, simple. Intentional listening. Yeah. And if you're hearing a message from your senior leadership that then needs to be communicated, part of your job is to say, how am I going to do that regularly and frequently with my team so that they fully understand and come on board? Be compassionate to everyone and listen. Conciseness is important if you aren't chatting often. Yes. Sources are important. Yeah. It needs to be inviting and welcoming as well, ongoing through things that not many know about. Love that. And meetings with a positive when the focus has been on the negative. Oh, so important. Excellent. Thank you so much. A lot of good information. Authenticity and transparency. Yeah, back to those really critical pieces about communication. Being in the know, making sure, absolutely, getting the information that you need. Let's go back to Zoom. So hopefully you've got it up. And, sorry, back to my slides. Here we go. So it's much of what you said, right? Tailoring the approach and follow up. So meeting people where they're at, understanding that some people will require more one-on-one and connecting that way. Think of formality and medium. So again, thinking about different approaches, how you start a meeting, how you end a meeting. Often, again, getting into the habit in Zoom or on online for you to be on camera. And just imagine that the first part of the meeting is 5 minutes, like you were grabbing coffee at a meeting. So giving people opportunity to kind of chit chat. If it's about behavior change, how are you going to reinforce and support that change, particularly around things like health and safety? Where possible, make it about a dialogue. If there's a task, understanding how are you going to follow up on that task, and then making a plan to ensure you aren't missing anyone as you move forward. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. So really, again, thinking about all the different things I need to be mindful of in order to get my message across, particularly when it's critical. So what I want to talk a little bit about now is like, what tools do I use to be able to communicate effectively? So you're going to receive on the webinar portal a communications template. This is part of the assignment, and it's important because it's essential as you move towards more comprehensive communication, going beyond your team, for you to be thinking about who are the audiences, who is it coming from, what are my key messages. So those types of things, this template is what helps you. It helps you with that. So for example, in terms of communication, let me just get rid of this because I think it's making it, there we go. Thinking about the owner of the communication plan, it's really important for you to know that, like, okay, who's this message coming from? Is it the board? Is it me? Is it the executive director or the CEO? Who are the spokespersons? So really important for you to check in. Am I allowed to talk about this? When am I allowed to talk about this? Is there any guidance to what I'm supposed to be saying? So really thinking about who the spokespersons are. At what point do I direct it to someone else? And what's the goal? What's your overall goal? Are you providing information? Are you providing an update? Are you gathering input? Are you ensuring that people have the information that they require? Do you want to allay fears? What's the overall goal of your communication? And then really getting it down to what are the goals of the message, the key messages, that are part of the goals. So jotting down bullets that say, this is an update. I'd like to provide you with more information. This is what we know right now. And here's the details. And very clearly laying that out. And you saw that very clearly both in Doug Ford and Jacinda Ardern. But really what helps is getting it down to what is it that I'm trying to say and how do I say that concisely? And then we talk about audience identification. So who are the people that I need to communicate with? You'll see that there's a big list that we've provided there. And you want to think about, okay, who in the community needs to know, that my funders need to know, is the executive director communicating with the board? Does the leadership team need to know? And these might be things, changes in your own team. And you need to think about who does it impact in my organization and how am I going to communicate that out? So having a communication plan allows you to be thinking about those things so that you have a really clear rollout of how this is going to go. And it allows us to think, it's like, oh, I didn't think of that. I didn't realize that if I changed the intake form, it's actually going to impact a whole bunch of other people. So before I do that, I need to be communicating with them. I need to gather their feedback. I need to let them know when it's going to change and how it's going to change, for example. So it helps us to understand who the audiences are for the changes that we might be making on our team, or if it's the message coming from another place, how it is that we're going to move that forward. So it's a template. It's meant to kind of go through and say, okay, what is it that I'm communicating? Who am I communicating to? Who owns this plan? Who do I talk to if it goes past me? So having the more clarity that you're able to have, the better. And so as you'll see further down, there's like a critical path. And again, some of us love this, I do, others may not, but it helps us to be really methodical. And I've left some examples here so you have an idea of what it is that you might be thinking about. So here you would think, who's the audience? What issues are going to be important to them? So for staff, why is this happening? Does it impact me? Am I going to lose my job? My hours going to change? Those might be some of the questions that people have. And you want to be sure that in your messaging, you answer the questions that they have. In addition to the key points, it gets customized to the messages that they have. So then based on the issues, you'd say, okay, here's my objectives of the things that I want to cover to be sure that I address what I anticipate are some of the issues. Here with the issues, you might get some people to help you out. What do you think are going to be the issues that people might have with this change that we're thinking of implementing? And then you want to think about your tools and your tactics. So how am I going to communicate? For some people that maybe aren't that impacted as significantly, you might say, I'm going to send an FYI email to them so that they know that this is happening. For others, you might think this is so important and they might not take this well. I'm going to make a call or set a meeting with them. For others, it might be, I'm going to meet with my team to be sure that they're clear. So you have to also think about level of communication tool that is in direct relation to how people are going to be impacted. Then you roll out your timing. So when is this going to happen? What's the sequential order? Who needs to know first, second, third, and fourth? Who is the responsible spokesperson? That might be you. It might be your manager. It might be the ED, but you need to have an understanding of what that is. And then how are you going to make sure it was successful? You want to be able to say, wow, I just want to be sure that the board is informed and that they know what's happening. I want to make sure that people endorse the way that we're moving forward. I want staff to understand why we're doing it and feel comfortable with the change. Whatever it might be, this tool is meant to help you think clearly through all the different scenarios so that when you roll out, and obviously we would only do this in moments of significant change or a significant message that needs to be communicated out, you do it in such a way that all of your stakeholders feel like they're informed, that they have the information that they require to then support whichever other group is a part of that. And that other piece might be thinking about how are our participants or our clients, our patients going to take this, and do we have to do something particular for that group? So you will receive this template so that when you have some important messages to communicate, you're able to do so from that perspective. So then I'll turn it back to Carrie to talk a little bit about civility.
Thanks so much, Maria. So just before we move into our wrap up, we really wanted to spend a bit of time. Civility is so critically important within the culture of an organization. And it also, frankly, does a little bit of setup as we get into our conflict resolution session that will be our September focus. So I actually want to start with a quote from Gandhi. Civility does not mean the mere outward gentleness of speech cultivated for the occasion, but an inborn gentleness and desire to do the opponent good. So, and I think back to when somebody was typing, when we were typing in sort of our responses, and the person who said clear is kind, and that word kindness is really about it. So we really only often need to think about civility if if everything's going well. Generally people are civil. It's when there's disagreements, differences of opinion, that you may start seeing civility erode in how people are behaving. And again, it's that desire to be kind to each other that we really want to fall back on as, yes, we wish to be civil, because this isn't personal. This is a difference of opinion. This is a disagreement. And as a leader, it can be really challenging to see other people not being as civil to each other as you would like. And some of the things that you can do as a leader related to that are being a model of civility yourself. Sort of making sure you're stopping in those moments, taking those breaths, sort of not letting that emotion overtake how you're communicating with somebody, assuming the best of people. Again, until you know the reason why they were late for the third time, let's assume that there's a reason, and let's ask, and then go from there. Relying on facts. Again, sometimes people become a little bit incivil because they've heard rumors or innuendo, and they're sort of taking a bit of a tone as a result of, well, I think this is what happened and I'm not happy about it. So make sure you're relying on facts. And as a leader, constantly challenge when you see individuals being incivil towards each other. And again, you have to challenge it in a civil way, but letting people know, that that's not okay. We need to treat each other well. If you're in a negative sort of email exchange that's gone back and forth once or twice, you know, that I've seen those spiral into just sort of a sling fest. So if you find a particular media is challenging for a particular conversation and it's not going well from a civility perspective, stop in that media and move to a different one. Pick up the phone, say, hey, let's just get face to face and talk about this. Be very thoughtful about when you're using I, you, when to use we. And as somebody, again, picked up on in that email, you almost never want to use they when you're communicating. If you're talking about other people, you either want to say who they are, or sometimes when people use they, they're using it to sort of hide, you know, well, they all say that this happens. So challenge that when you hear it, and very, very rarely use it yourself. As we talked about earlier, understanding your own personal hot buttons and stepping away if you need to. And remembering that assertive is okay. There is a big difference between assertive and aggressive. There's a big difference between being assertive in a civil way and being assertive in an incivil way, which again is really closer to an aggression or a passive aggressive. So you can be assertive and empathetic. You can say, hey, I understand this is the situation that you're in, and here's what I need from you. So how are we going to make this happen? You can become increasingly firm without becoming aggressive, but saying, you know, well, we've dealt with this a couple of times now, so we really do have to make a plan, and we're going to have to follow up on the plan. And practice being assertive is always very helpful. So again, these are a few tips related to civility. We're really going to get into navigating conflict at our next session in September. So in our last few minutes here, we'll move into our wrap up mode, which let's take a moment and go to our reflections. So again, for those of you who are doing the certificate stream, there's reflections posted online. We're going to ask you to look at the Great Communicator checklist and think about the areas that you excel at and where you'd like to focus on developing. What you have done during the pandemic and learned about supporting great communication. And the communication template that Maria provided will be there for you, and we'll be asking you to complete it. Ideally, if you have an upcoming message that you need to be sharing, go ahead and give it a shot, sort of planning it out in the template, or you can sort of imagine a need to do that and use a fictional communication that you need to make. So that's for those, the certificate. Again, our next webinar is September 28th. So we're going to do our regular Wordle as we leave. If you could take a moment, so click into the polls again, give us a word or two as to how you're feeling leaving this session. Remember, if you want to use more than one word, you need to put a hyphen in between them. And as everybody is doing that and checking out, again, thank you so much for spending your time with us. I hope you have a great summer, and we all look forward to seeing you in September.